Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Kilayim, Chapter 3, Halacha 3 in the Art Scroll 29a2. Now, we're going to get back into the concept of the rosh tor for vegetables. Now, a rosh tor is going to be a diamond shape, or it could be a triangle shape. And we covered this before in Chapter 3, Halacha 1. In Chapter 3, Halacha 1, Rabbi Yehuda comes along and says, within this plot of land, within a 6 by 6 tefachim area, you can have 6 vegetable patches, 6 little spots within it. The Tanakhama say 5. And how was it that they came and they said, or Rabbi Yehuda came and said 6? Because he said you can use a rosh tor within this little box. The Tanakhama didn't agree with that. They said, no, you can do 5, and it's not going to be a rosh tor. Why would it be that they weren't going to allow a rosh tor formation in that case at all? I think because they were worried that the leaves of the vegetables would appear where it's going to spill over, and it's going to give, vegetables are leafy. Look at your lettuce. You eat that for your salad. And look at other kinds of greens that might be there that are going to be leafy. Well, in a rosh tor, normally you're going to be dealing with a rosh tor in terms of a grain. Grain just goes up and down. But in terms of vegetables that, it'll sort of like create a canopy with the leaf and droop over a little bit, it's going to give this appearance that it sort of spills over. And Rabbi Yehuda's position over there was, look, I have the spacing, right, between this diamond and that diamond will still be 1.5 tefachim. And, even if you're doing the spacing, you can get it to fit. But the Tanakhama didn't allow it. And I think because they wanted the fields to look cleanly, we're getting back into the rosh tor of the vegetable. And in one of the opinions of Chapter 3, Halacha 1, this was talking about a field in a dry area. In other words, it's a standalone field. And today we're getting into a field within a field. So you have a vegetable patch or garden, and you have species A there. And now, for whatever reason, you're going to try to figure out how to grow species B there. You've decided to take part of it out and plant a new species there. Well, how far are your setbacks going to be if you're going to be doing this? That's what we're going to be covering. So today in Halacha 3, we're going to be dealing with something that might be a little bit different than just a standalone patch. This is going to be a field within a field, and how are you going to do that? So the Mishnah says that if there was a rosh tor of one species of yarak, which is going to be vegetables, and yarak, again, is a play on words for greens, right? Because the vegetables often have greens that you're going to be eating, and it entered into the field of another species of yarak, that it is permitted because the rosh tor clearly looks like the extension of the first field where it emerges. And it doesn't look like one species of yarak planted inside of a field containing another species of yarak. Now, although, says the Pnei Moshe, the two species are not separated from each other, it's still going to be allowed because it's discernible that the species is not mingled. And that's always going to be the key. It's always going to be that, does this look like a mixed up field or not? And only in a situation where different species appear to be mingled is this going to be a problem. Now, again, I think in Chapter 3, Halacha 1, Rabbi Yehuda's position over there, the Tanakhama would say, look, if you're making these rosh tor diamonds within this tiny little patch of a 6 by 6 tefach area, it's going to look like, this is a mingled area. Now, the Mishnah is basically going to be saying that the rosh tor formation is allowed also concerning vegetables. Normally, we learned this so far dealing with grain. This is a chiddush that they're now going to be allowing it in this kind of circumstance. Notice that they didn't allow it in Rabbi Yehuda's circumstance in Chapter 3, Halacha 1, but they are now. And it's not prohibited, but the idea is that what happens if the leaves are going to spread out? And is it going to diminish the distinctiveness of the two species? That's the insight by the Pnei Moshe to try to understand this. And the Rosh Cirilio is going to be saying that the reason this Mishnah is repeating this ruling concerning vegetables, and again, this came up earlier when we were looking at the Rosh Torah formation in the Mishnah in 2.5, and also it came up in chapter 3, Halacha 1, implicitly. Why is this repeating this? And the Rosh Cirilio is saying like this. He's saying that whether the Rosh Torah formation is permitted with respect to vegetables, when a Rosh Torah from one patch protrudes into another patch as opposed to a field, then the Rosh Torah formation is going to be considered a Rosh Torah with respect to two species in a single patch. And in order to facilitate what's going to be coming up next, we have to go back to what we've already learned, right? So we know that when you're doing separations for grain, it's going to be 10.5 amos. That, by the way, is going to be the size of the bet rova, right? Bet rova is going to be 1/24 of the bet sa'ah. And when you have two fields of different but distinct varieties of vegetables, we learned before in chapter 3, halacha 1, it has to be separated by at least 6 tefachim. Now, the separation that comes between smaller amounts of vegetables within a patch is going to be 1.5 tefachim, but the Rosh is saying that there's no difference between two fields of vegetables and a row of Yerushalmi that is going to be planted next to a field of other Yerushalmi. And in both cases, this setback is going to have to be 6 tefachim. But what we're going to be getting into is what happens if you have vegetable A, and within vegetable A, you clear out some of the area and you're going to plant a row within this. The question is this row going to have to extend throughout the entire field? In other words, you have to split it into 3 fields, basically field A and the row of the new vegetable going as field B, and then what was part of field A is now going to be part of field C. So you have 3 distinct fields. Or is it going to be where you can do a row within the field, carve out part of the area, do your setbacks, and leave a strip within it? And if that's going to be the case, how far do you have to set all this back? So if his field was planted with one species of vegetable, says this Mishnah, and he wishes to plant inside of it a row of another species, and it's going to separate this new field, this new strip from the surrounding species A that was there before, how is he going to do it? And Rabbi Ishmael is going to say like this. He says that he may only do so if the furrow on each side extends from one end of the field to its other end. In other words, what Rabbi Ishmael is saying is that, look, if you're going to put new species B within this existing vegetable field that's there, by the way, this is not going to work for grain. You're talking about vegetable patches here. And if you want to do this, what are you going to do? And Rabbi Ishmael is basically saying that, look, if you're going to plant a row of vegetables within a field of another vegetables, so that the species in the field is going to be surrounded, and it's going to surround this row, you have to have, gaps. And basically, what he's saying is that this has to effectively split the field into 2 parts, right? This is going to be a case where if you're going to make species B as a strip, that you have to split this now into 3 fields so that your strip will split the field in half. You have your setbacks, and you have field A that was there, and now field C, which was part of A, is now split. And the new species is going to make up this new thing. That's going to be his position. Rabbi Akiva is going to come along and say like this. He's going to say that the length of the furrow must be 6 tefachim, and the width must correspond to the fullness. So what is he saying? And according to the Rosh, the explanation is like this. The term of the fullness means its length, so that the size of the furrow separating the species must be 6 tefachim. So how long are you doing this, right? Basically what he's saying, and according to the Rambam commentary, is that the width of the furrow must equal the depth. And so you don't have to plant across the entire field. That's what Rabbi Akiva is saying. He says that you can make species B within species A, but you have to clear out a lot of species A so you have your setbacks. And if you do enough setbacks, you can make it work. Now, what's going to be, according to Rabbi Akiva, to Rambam's explanation of Rabbi Akiva, he's going to be saying that Rabbi Akiva is arguing that the furrows separating between the row from the field does not need to extend the full length of the field. In other words, you don't need to split this into 3 fields. And effectively, you can have 2 fields, right? You can have species A that partially gets hollowed out, and you can put species B in there, but the new species B has to have unplanted areas, and in other words, these unplanted furrows that are going to create these spaces have to at least be 6 tefachim long, and then he's saying that then there's going to be a maloket on how wide are those furrows going to have to be. But again, part of the idea that we've learned is that when you're walking by or your neighbor's walking by and they look at this, they're going to have to see that, look, you really are not doing a mixed field. You've created your setbacks, and there's clear areas where it's carved out, so it's clear that your intention was not to do a mixed field. And then the Mishnah continues and says that the width of the furrow is equal to the width of the sole of the foot, which is a tefach. Now, why are we talking about the width of the sole of the foot? Well, we covered this before. When you're making your walking path, the smallest size walking path you can do, which is going to be considered a border, is going to be where it's raised above the garden patch, at least 1 tefach, which is a handbreadth, and it has to be at least a tefach wide. Why? Because if you put your hand next to the ball of your foot where your toes meet, the widest part of your foot is a tefach. It is as wide as the width of your fist. So what is the minimum measure for your walking path border? That is going to be the tefach. That's going to be the width of the sole of your foot. And basically what this is saying is if you're doing less than that, it's not going to be a border. Keep in mind, we covered this before in chapter 3, halacha 1, that this border is going to be 1 tefach wide, and it's going to be raised above the ground 1 tefach. So what is this saying? Rabbi Yudah's position is going to be like what we saw in chapter 3, halacha 1, that if you're creating this border around species B that you're planting within this hollowed out area of part of the field of species A, that you can do the same thing that you were doing in chapter 3, halacha 1. In other words, you create your 1 tefach wide border, your 1 tefach high border between species A, species B, and again, you have to make sure that this is going to, this furrow is going to be at least 6 tefachim long so that it looks that way. It looks like a separated thing. Now, the Gemara is going to go back to the Rosh Tor formation, and basically the idea is that if the field was planted with 1 species of vegetables, and he wants to now plant inside of this a row of another species of vegetables, then separating it from the rest of the field by an empty furrow on each of the sides, basically Rabbi Ishmael says that he may do so only if the furrow on each side is going to extend from one end of the field to the other. In other words, you have to split this field into 3 parts, according to Rabbi Ishmael. Rabbi Akiva says that no, the length of the furrow must be at least 6 tefachim, and the width must correspond to the fullness. In other words, Rabbi Akiva's point is that you don't have to go through the whole thing. You can empty out part of it, but you have to make sure you have the proper setbacks in field B. So Rabbi Ishmael is going to express his opinion in this Gemara concerning the length of the furrow separating the different species of vegetables, and he did not state how wide this furrow must be. So in other words, he's coming and saying, look, you have to make 3 fields, but we know that there has to be setbacks between field A, field B, and field C. And what is going to be the difference, the setback between field B and field A, and field B and field C, right? Keep in mind, field A and field C are planted with the same thing because it was originally just field A, and you split it in half with this row making field B. So field B is going to be a different vegetable. So yes, there are 3 fields according to Rabbi Ishmael's point, but only 2 species. So how far is this width according to the furrow? According to Rabbi Ishmael, how far does that have to be? What's your setback? And the Gemara is going to answer that this can be derived from the view of Rabbi Akiva, who stated that the width of the furrow must equal its fullness. And it's going to be explained like this. Gemara says, if even Rabbi Akiva, who rules leniently that a field planted with one species may close in the row planted with another species on 3 sides, in other words, that's going to be a leniency. And basically, it continues and says he maintains that the width of the furrow must correspond to the fullness. So Gemara continues, says, then according to Rabbi Ishmael, who rules stringently that the field must be planted with one species, and it says that the one species may close in the row planted with another species on only 2 sides. In other words, you have to run through the entire field. You can't fully close it in on 3 sides. You can only have it separated between 2 sides. And the Gemara says that, is it not certain that the width of the furrow must correspond to the fullness, even according to Rabbi Ishmael? In other words, Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva are only disagreeing on the length of the furrow. They're not disagreeing on the width of the furrow. So Rabbi Akiva is saying that, look, separations of vegetable fields is going to be 6 tefachim, so make the length of this separator at least 6 tefachim. And how wide do you make it? According to them, they're going to say, or according to one opinion, it's going to be the width of the foot, just like we saw in chapter 3, halacha 1. But you have to have enough visual indicator to make it, to show that it's distinctive. And how much is that going to be? That is going to be 6 tefachim. Keep in mind that is going to correspond directly to the temple amma, which is going to be 6 tefachim. And we know that from the Maloket on, there's 2 measurements in the temple. It's talked about in the beginning of Erevim and in the Bavli, where one measurement is going to be 5 tefachim, and it says over there that the measurements of the other tefachim, including for Kilayim, is going to be 6 tefachim. The measurements, by the way, are all known as a halacha l'Moshe l'Sinai. So we see that Rabbi Ishmael, Rabbi Akiva are disagreeing on the length of the furrow, and they both agree that it's going to correspond to the fullness. In other words, that the width is going to be the same, but Rabbi Ishmael is going to say it has to run through the entire field. In other words, you're splitting it in half. And Rabbi Akiva's lenient position is that it can be surrounded on 3 sides. Now, we covered this before. There was an issue where you're surrounding your species, and that looks like it's going to be an issue. We saw this in the law when we're worried about a chessboard and how many can we plant onto a 25 plot chessboard of a patch, and we could basically only do 9 of those plots. So basically, yeah, you could theoretically do up to 13, but the Tanakhama say no because it looks like a mixed field. And they say that the most you can do without it looking like a mixed field is going to be 9 plots out of that 25 plot field. And in the configuration of the 3-2 the 3-2-1-2-1 pattern that they did to get up to 9, none of the species are being surrounded. And what it looks like over here is a leniency by Rabbi Akiva that you'd say, well, perhaps it's like you're surrounding this one species within this area that you're trying to plant as this strip. And that, I think, is why Rabbi Ishmael is being strict and saying, no, you can't surround the species. Rabbi Akiva is saying, yes, you can, but you have to have the proper setbacks. Now, our Mishnah is going to be citing this dispute between Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva, whether the furrow separating the species must extend through the entire field and split it in half. And now you're creating this new strip running across the entire field. And concerning a row of vegetables planted in a field containing another species of vegetables, question is, are you going to have to really split this in half in all the cases, or can you do something more lenient where you're surrounding it, but you have the right setbacks? So in this case, the Bryce is now going to be looking at a case where you want to plant a row of vegetables in a field of grain. Now, that's going to be a case where the species has to be separated by an empty space that is going to measure at least 10 and 1/2 amos. And it also, the width is going to now have to be 6 tefachim. We learned this before, that in chapter 2, that if you want to separate, create grain next to vegetables, that it has to at least be 6 tefach long for the divider of space, and it has to be at least 10.5 amos wide. So it's a pretty big gap. So the Gemara is going to ask like this. Now it says, how would Rabbi Ishmael rule with respect to the case of planting a row of vegetables inside of this field of grain? And he's going to be arguing this same case. In other words, he's going to be saying, look, these setbacks are going to be much bigger if you're going to be doing this within a field of grain. Everybody agrees about that. But is he going to be saying that if you're going to plant a field of vegetables, a patch of vegetables inside of a field of grain, are you going to have to run through the entire grain field? In the case of the vegetables, he would say yes. Would you have to do that? And basically, he's of course arguing that the length of the separation does indeed have to extend across the entire field. Now the Gemara is going to continue, says, if even Rabbi Akiva, who's lenient here in this Mishnah, is requiring that the separation between the species of vegetables needs only to be at least 6 tefachim long in this row, is it, that would seem to be, more stringent if you were going to be requiring the separation between the row of vegetables and the grain field to be 10.5 amos long. So according to Rabbi Ishmael, who's stringent in this Mishnah, who's requiring this complete split across the entire field to make this new row, Gemara says, is it not certain that he would also be stringent here with regards to trying to do a row of vegetables inside of a grain field? In other words, basically, Rabbi Ishmael is disputing the length required on the field. He's saying you have to go through the entire field, and Rabbi Akiva says, no, it's enough just to make a 6 tefach long row, and he's saying that the fullness has to at least be a tefach wide to make a footpath, right, so that you can walk and water your plants. And basically, why are they saying that it's going to be a 6 tefach? Because they're saying that, look, your strip here is going to be viewed as being significant and a small patch within itself, and anything shorter than that is not going to be regarded as being significant, and because of that, it's going to look like it is Kilayim. Rabbi Ishmael, again, is being more strict, and he's saying, no, if you're going to make this patch, you can do it, but you have to run through the entire field, even the grain field. So the Gemara is going to continue, is going to say that there's no need for this question concerning whether Rabbi Ishmael argues with regard to the length of the separation. Rather, what clarification do we need? It says, how would Rabbi Ishmael rule there in the case of the vegetables in the field regarding the width of the separation? In other words, he's going to be saying, look, he also is going to agree that within the grain field that you have to go through the entire field to make this new strip, but how wide does it have to be? So the Gemara is going to answer. It's going to say, just as you say concerning the case discussed in the Mishnah here, that the opinions of Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva are the same with respect to the width of the separation. In other words, both agree that the width corresponds to the fullness. And it says, so too concerning the Beurim's case, where they say there's no difference in the opinion. In other words, both are going to say that one is going to say in both cases you have to run through the entire field, and one is saying that you can make at least a 6 tefach long row, and it has to have the right setbacks. And in the case of Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Ishmael, they're both going to be saying the same with regards to the width of the separation. In other words, both Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva, in the case of the vegetables, when the vegetables agreed about the width. And basically what this is saying is that they're both going to agree about the vegetables in the field of grain as well. And they're going to basically be saying, what is the width of the separation between the row of vegetables and the row of grain? It's going to be 6 tefachim. Now, what is going to be the length of this row that you have to have in order to pull this off? Rabbi Akiva is going to say that it has to at least be 10 and a half amos long in order to do it, but they're both going to agree that you have to create a separation that's going to be at least 6 tefach wide. So the Gemara is going to be concluding that, concerning planting a row of vegetables, that they're both going to have the same positions. That you can, in one case you have to run through the entire field, but the width is going to be the same of this gap that you have to create between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael. There's no disagreement. And in the other case, if you're doing vegetables and vegetables, you can do a strip within the main field, but you have to have the proper setbacks. And even if you were going to go to grain and vegetables, that you have to have the right setbacks. They both agree on how wide the setback is. The question is, how long does it need to be? Do you have to run through the whole field? And in the case of, over there in grain and vegetables, it's going to be where you have to have this separation of at least 10 and a half amos. So it's going to be a significant and long strip of 10 and a half amos long, according to Rabbi Akiva, and 6 tefachim wide. They both agree on 6 tefachim wide with grain and vegetables. Gemara says, however, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish both say there's no difference between the two cases. In other words, regarding the law with one row and the law regarding 2 rows are going to be the same. In other words, what happens if you want to now plant 2 strips within here? What's going to be the law? And they're both going to be saying that you're going to hollow out the field. Instead of doing 1 vegetable patch in here, you're now going to be doing 2. But there's a clarification that's going to be coming. And the Gemara is going to conclude that Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva are going to be requiring only a 6 tefach wide gap between a row of vegetables and a field of grain, and there's no maloket on that. They don't disagree on that. They both agree in all the cases about the width of that separating border. Now, what is going to be the extent of this permit? And we covered this in chapter 2. We see that you have to have a separation of at least 10 and a half amos between a field of grain and a field of vegetables. But here, however, we're dealing with a row of vegetables and a field of grain. And so over there, you need to only separate it 6 tefachim. So Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said that it is permissible to clear an area for the purpose of planting up to 4 rows of vegetables that would be separated from the grain planted within a valley by only 6 tefachim. Now, basically, he's basically saying that 4 rows are not going to constitute a field, and thus they only need to be separated from the grain field by 6 tefachim. But Rabbi Kanievsky points out that more than 4 rows is going to constitute a field and is going to now require larger separations. So again, in these cases, we're talking about garden patches, and that's why Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish is bringing up to 4. In other words, if you're going to be doing up to 4, you're still within the range of garden patches. Gemara is going to qualify this permit. Rabbi Yochanan is saying that this is allowed provided that the 2 outside rows, which are closest to the species planted in the valley, can be considered a garden patch. In other words, they're going to be 6 tefachim wide. And if the outer rows, the species closest to the side of the valley are going to be 6 tefachim wide, then the species are going to be planted all in rows, and then even the middle ones are going to appear to be distinct. So if the outer ones are less than 6 tefachim wide, then you can't do 4 rows planted there because it's going to appear to be mingled with the species of the valley. So Rabbi Zera is going to clarify this, and he's going to say that in explanation of this qualification, that the outer rows are considered a patch when they're 6 tefachim wide, provided there are at least 3 out of 6 tefachim in these rows that are actually planted. And if less than these 3 tefachim are planted, they cannot be considered a patch, and they're going to be forbidden. Gemara is going to provide Rabbi Yudah's source. Rabbi Yudah was talking about the width of this furrow, and we're talking about going back now to the field of the vegetable patch within the vegetable patch. So the Gemara now is going to provide Rabbi Yudah's source. Rabbi Huna says the source of Rabbi Yudah is the verse that states as follows in Beurim 11:10, where it says, "And you water it on foot like a garden of your coat. So why does the verse mention that the garden is watered on foot? In other words, to teach you that the boundary of the patch is going to be the width of the sole of the foot. And that is going to allow the person to walk around this patch to water it, and you're not going to trample the plants. So this does have a Deraita connection. So the Gemara says, and what is the measure of the sole of the foot? That's going to be a tefach. So in other words, you have to have your walking path, the minimum measure of the walking path. It's going to be the width of the foot, so you can walk around, so you can tend to the plants, not trample them, and water them. So based on this verse, Rabbi Yehuda is maintaining that a 1 tefach separation is enough between the different species of vegetables. So vegetable patch A, vegetable patch B, that you have a 1 tefach separation. So we learned here in our Mishnah that in the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, a gap of 1 tefach is necessary between the species of your coat. And in dispute with Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva, who are going to require the width of the separating furrow to equal its fullness. So there's a maloket here, and the Gemara says, similarly, we learned in the Mishnah there earlier in the chapter that in disputes with the Tanna Kama who allow 5 species in a 6x6 patch, this, by the way, is in chapter 3, Halacha 1, Rabbi Yehuda allows 6 species because he's going to require only a tefach in between the species. And since in disputes in both Mishnahs are going to be dependent on the amount of separation between different species of vegetables, why is the Mishnah recording this dispute twice? And once their dispute is recorded in one case, it should have been enough that it would be finished. So, in fact, there is a dissenting opinion, and it could have been deduced from this fact that the dissenting opinion is also going to be in this other case. So, in other words, why are you bringing up this maloket again about the width of a tefach? And we learned over there that separations between different species within a patch is going to be 1.5 tefachim. It's not going to be 1 tefach, although we were talking about the 1 tefach border walking patch. Well, in the case of chapter 3, Halacha 1, in order to pull this off, if you're surrounding the species with a border, you now have to shrink the middle patch. So you're going to have setbacks that's going to be greater than 1 tefach. In other words, the Tanna Kama are saying, look, between species, you have to have 1.5 tefach gap, and very nice that you created a walking path, but in order to keep all of the setbacks, according to the Tanna Kama, you can only plant 1 species in the middle of the surrounded border, and you have to shrink that so that you have enough space. Rabbi Yehuda dissents, and that's how he's getting to 6 tefachim, 6 species within there. First of all, you have 1 tefach gap according to him, and also he's doing everything with a rosh tor. And the Tanna Kama are saying, well, you can't really do it with a rosh tor within such a small area because the leaves are going to spill over, and they're going to appear to be mingled. So the Gemara is going to answer this. Why is this coming up twice? Basically, that's what the question is. It says, if we learned before, both Rabbi Yehuda's position and the rabbi's position is going to be here in our Mishnah, and we would have learned Rabbi Yehuda's opinion there, and we would not have learned the rabbi's opinion there in the earlier Mishnah, we would have said as follows. Okay, in other words, if it was in one place and not the other, here's what it would have said. It would have said, if even Rabbi Yehuda, who's stringent here in our Mishnah regarding the furrow separating this row of 1 species of vegetables and the field of another species of vegetables to be a tefach wide, and if that's going to be lenient, then in the earlier Mishnah allowing 6 varieties in chapter 3, Halacha 1 to be planted in a 6x6 patch where you're going to have a 1 tefach separation, then the Gemara says, according to the rabbis, basically Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva, who are going to be lenient here in our Mishnah, allowing the width of the furrows to be less than a tefach, is it not certain that they would be lenient there in the earlier Mishnah, and they would allow 6 varieties to be planted in that garden patch? In other words, you would come up with the wrong number if you didn't say it twice. If you only said it once, A is not like B and B is not like A, you would come up with the wrong halacha. So the Gemara says it's necessary to teach the dispute over there as well in chapter 3, halacha 1, to demonstrate clearly that the rabbis and Rabbi Yehuda disagree in both places and in both cases. And the Gemara continues, it says, or by the same token, if we would have learned both the rabbi's opinion and Rabbi Yuda's opinion there in chapter 3, halacha 1, and we would have learned the rabbi's opinion here, and we didn't learn Rabbi Yuda's opinion here in our Mishnah about the one tefach width, we would have said as follows. We would have said, if even the rabbis who are stringent over there in that Mishnah in chapter 3, halacha 1, limiting the number of species to 5 within this patch, and they're going to be lenient over here. And then, in other words, they're going to say that you can separate between less and a tefach. So the Gemara says that according to Rabbi Yuna, who's lenient over there in the earlier Mishnah, where he's going to be allowing 6 varieties in this little 6x6 garden patch, basically he's saying, is it not certain that he'd be lenient over here as well? In other words, based on this logic, one might mistakenly think that our Mishnah is basically saying there's no dispute. And in fact, everybody agrees that this furrow between this new row that you're doing can be less than a tefach. And the Gemara is saying that it is necessary to teach the dispute here in our Mishnah to clearly demonstrate that the rabbis and Rabbi Yudah disagree here. They disagreed there and they disagree here. And it's necessary to teach the dispute there in the earlier case to demonstrate that it's going to be a disagreement in this case as well. In other words, there's 2 possibilities. First, the opinion of the rabbis, if it were not mentioned in the first Mishnah in chapter 3, halacha 1, and then you have the opinion over here where, Rabbi Yudah's, if you didn't mention it over there or over here as well, basically the Gemara is first explaining why the opinion of Rabbi Yudah is mentioned first, and then explaining why his opinion is mentioned here as well. And basically, if the Gemara didn't do it, you would be pointing out a novelty here. You basically, if you didn't put the refutation of Rabbi Yudah's point in both places, you would end up with the wrong measurements, and you'd end up with the wrong setbacks. And that's why it's put into different places. And if you had it in one place, you would end up just not doing a setback in the right way, or you'd overcrowd it. And they didn't want it to be overcrowded, and it would appear to be overcrowded. That's the point. Have a great day.